The stained glass windows shattered before I could even say, "I do." Glass rained down like crushed diamonds, and there he stood, the most feared man in the city, stepping over the bleeding bodies of my fiancé's guards. He didn't come to stop a wedding. He came to steal me. The cathedral dressing room smelled suffocatingly of white lilies and hairspray. I stared at myself in the floor-to-ceiling mirror, my reflection, a stranger drowning in layers of heavy ivory duchess satin. I was not the typical Mafia princess. In a world of ruthless, rail-thin socialites who survived on vodka and celery, I took up space. I was fat. It was a word I had learned to carry like a shield, but today, strapped into a corset that dug viciously into my ribs, it felt like a vulnerability. The dress had been custom-made by a terrified Parisian designer who had spent 3 hours trying to discreetly suggest slimming silhouettes before my father, William Sullivan, slammed a loaded Glock onto the glass table and told him to make me look like a queen. But I didn't feel like a queen. I felt like a sacrifice. My father was the head of the Sullivan Syndicate, holding a grip on the city's docks and shipping lanes. But his empire was bleeding. To stop the hemorrhaging, he was selling me to Nathaniel Croft. Nathaniel was cold, calculating, and terrifyingly ambitious. He was the heir to the Croft family, a rival faction that had choked our supply lines for 18 months. This wedding wasn't a union of love. It was a hostile takeover, wrapped in white tulle. "You look." The door clicked open, and Nathaniel stepped into the room, waving away my 2 nervous bridesmaids. He wore a bespoke tuxedo that cost more than most people made in a year. His eyes raked over my body, pausing on the curve of my stomach and the fullness of my hips. His lip curled upward in a micro-expression of disdain. "Expensive Harper. You're not supposed to see the bride before the wedding, Nathaniel. It's bad luck." I said, my voice trembling slightly, despite my best efforts to keep it steady. He let out a dry, humorless laugh, stepping closer until I could smell the sharp, metallic tang of his expensive cologne. "I don't believe in luck. I believe in assets. And today your father's docks become my assets. Try to smile out there, Harper. I know I'm not getting the trophy wife my father wanted, but you will play the part of a grateful, obedient bride. Do not embarrass me." He reached out his fingers, pinching the soft flesh of my upper arm, just hard enough to bruise, before turning on his heel and walking out. I swallowed the lump in my throat, blinking back tears that threatened to ruin 2 hours of makeup. I was used to the whispers. I was used to being the heavy daughter, kept in the background, out of the society pages. But today, I was being paraded in front of 300 of the most dangerous people on the East Coast, only to be chained to a man who despised me. When the heavy oak doors of the Cathedral of St. Jude finally swung open, the silence was deafening. The organ music swelled a haunting, vibrating chord that shook the marble floor beneath my satin heels. My father looped my arm through his. "Head up, Harper," he muttered from the side of his mouth. "Smile. Show them the Sullivans don't bleed." I forced the corners of my mouth up and began the longest walk of my life. The pews were packed with men in tailored suits, concealing shoulder holsters, and women dripping in blood diamonds. I could feel their eyes on me. I saw the subtle smirks, the leaning in to whisper behind manicured hands. "Look at her. Croft is only doing this for the docks. He'll have a mistress by Tuesday." At the end of the long aisle stood Nathaniel, looking like a prince from a dark fairy tale, his face an emotionless mask. Beside him was the Archbishop, practically sweating under the pressure of officiating a wedding, where half the congregation had a hit-out on the other half. My father handed me off. Nathaniel didn't take my hand gently. He seized it, his grip tight and possessive. The ceremony was a blur of Latin phrases and heavy incense. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate for the sky. I looked out at the sea of faces, realizing with a cold, sinking dread that there was no way out. This was my life now. I was a fat, unloved pawn in a war I never asked to fight. If anyone knows any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, the Archbishop's voice wavered slightly, echoing in the cavernous stone ceiling. "Speak now or forever. Hold your peace." It was a formality. No one would dare interrupt the union of the Croft and Sullivan families, until the heavy wooden doors of the cathedral exploded. The blast was deafening. A shockwave of heat and splintering wood blew down the center aisle, sending flower arrangements crashing to the floor and guests diving under the pews. Screams ripped through the air, instantly drowned out by the terrifying rhythmic clack-clack of assault rifles cocking. "Get down!" Nathaniel roared, shoving me roughly toward the altar steps. I tripped over the heavy hem of my dress, tearing the satin, and fell hard onto the cold marble. My veil ripped from my hair. Through the haze of grey smoke and falling plaster, a figure emerged. He didn't run. He didn't crouch. He walked down the center aisle of the cathedral, with the slow, predatory grace of a lion pacing through the tall grass. It was Sebastian Costa. The breath left my lungs. Every person in that room knew the name Costa. He was the ghost of the underground, the undisputed king of the Western Territories, and Nathaniel Croft's bloodiest, most bitter rival. The Crofts and the Costas had been killing each other in the streets for 3 generations. Sebastian stepped into the light, filtering through the remaining stained glass. He was devastatingly imposing, a towering figure in a midnight blue 3-piece suit that stretched over broad, heavily muscled shoulders. His dark hair was slicked back, and a jagged pale scar cut through his left eyebrow. But it was his eyes that froze the blood in my veins. They were a violent storm cloud grey, and they were locked entirely on me. Costa Buthwasjasta. Nathaniel screamed, drawing a gold-plated semi-automatic from beneath his tuxedo jacket. Around the room, dozens of Croft and Sullivan men scrambled to draw their weapons. But they were a second too late. From the balcony, the choir loft, and the side entrances, laser sights cut through the dusty air, painting red dots on the foreheads of my father Nathaniel and every single armed guard in the room. Sebastian had surrounded us entirely. "Put the gun down, Croft." Sebastian's voice was a low, gravelly baritone that effortlessly carried over the panicked murmurs of the crowd. "Unless you want this cathedral to become a mass grave." Nathaniel's hand shook his face, purple with rage. "You suicidal bastard! You think you can walk into my wedding and take out 2 families? My men will hunt you to the ends of the earth. I didn't come to start a war, Nathaniel," Sebastian said smoothly, stopping right at the base of the altar. He slipped his hands into his pockets, looking utterly bored by the dozens of guns pointed at him. "I came to collect what belongs to me." "Nothing here belongs to you," my father barked from the side, a red dot hovering directly between his eyes. Sebastian finally dragged his gaze away from me and looked at Nathaniel. "Your shipment at Pier 49 was intercepted an hour ago. Your warehouses in the South District are currently burning to the ground. You have nothing, Croft. Which means this lovely little merger you've arranged with the Sullivans." He chuckled a dark, chilling sound. "It's null and void." Nathaniel looked at my father, panic finally breaking through his arrogant facade. Is he telling the truth? Sebastian didn't wait for an answer. He turned his attention back to me. I was still huddled on the floor, a trembling mass of white silk, struggling to breathe in my corset. I expected him to look at me the way everyone else did, with pity, with disgust, or as a piece of collateral damage. Instead, Sebastian stepped up the stairs, ignoring Nathaniel completely, and knelt in front of me. Up close, he smelled of gunpowder mint and expensive leather. "You're shaking," he murmured, his voice dropping an octave meant only for my ears. "Please don't kill me. I whispered, tears finally spilling over my cheeks. Sebastian's jaw tightened. He reached out his large, calloused hand, gently brushing a stray tear from my cheek. The tenderness of the gesture was so jarring in the middle of a war zone that I stopped breathing. "I'm not going to kill you, Harper. I'm going to take you." "What?" I gasped. Before I could protest, Sebastian stood up and grabbed my hand. His grip was warm and solid, nothing like Nathaniel's bruising hold. He pulled me to my feet. "Take your hands off my wife," Nathaniel yelled, stepping forward, his gun aimed at Sebastian's back. Sebastian didn't even turn around. "She hasn't said I do yet, Croft, and if you pull that trigger, my men will turn you into mist. Lower the gun." Nathaniel hesitated, his eyes darting frantically to the red lasers painting his chest. Slowly, agonizingly, he lowered the weapon. "Good boy," Sebastian mocked. He looked down at me. "Walk with me, Harper. Keep your head down. If anyone shoots, I will take the bullet." I was paralyzed. Run with the head of the Costa Syndicate, the man who had likely ordered the murders of dozens of my father's men. But as I looked back at Nathaniel, whose eyes were filled with venom and cowardice, and then at my father, who was staring in shock but making no move to save me, I realized something terrifying. I was safer with the monster holding my hand than the ones I was leaving behind. I gripped Sebastian's hand tighter. He gave a sharp nod, and we began to walk back down the aisle we had just destroyed. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rustle of my ruined satin dress dragging over broken glass. "Cover us," Sebastian commanded into a small radio on his lapel. We spilled out of the cathedral doors into the blinding daylight. A massive, matte-black armored SUV was idling on the curb, the doors thrown open. Sebastian practically lifted me by my waist, a feat that shocked me given my size, and deposited me into the cavernous back seat before sliding in beside me. "Go!" he shouted to the driver. The tires shrieked against the asphalt, throwing me back against the leather seats as the SUV tore away from the church, a convoy of heavily armed cars pulling in behind us to block any pursuit. I sat there, my chest heaving, the heavy bridal gown suffocating me, as adrenaline crashed through my system. I looked over at Sebastian. He was calmly reloading a heavy black pistol, his face relaxed. "Why?" I finally choked out. "Why me? If you wanted to hurt Nathaniel, you ruined his business. Why take me? I'm nobody." I gestured helplessly to my large frame, the ruined dress. "I'm just the fat Sullivan girl, a bargaining chip." Sebastian snapped the magazine into place and looked up. His storm-grey eyes swept over me, and for the first time in my life, a man looked at my body not with disdain or tolerance, but with an intense, burning hunger. "You're not a bargaining chip, Harper," Sebastian said, his voice a low, dangerous purr that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "And you are exactly what I've been waiting for. Nathaniel Croft didn't deserve to breathe the same air as you, let alone marry you." He leaned closer, the heat of his body radiating against mine in the confined space. "You think you're nobody. By tomorrow morning, the whole underworld will know that Sebastian Costa started a war just to steal you." I squeezed my eyes shut as the reality of my situation locked around me tighter than the corset. I had escaped the gilded cage only to be thrown into the lion's den. And the lion was looking at me like I was the only meal he would ever need. The drive was a blur of towering pine trees and iron gates. We didn't head into the city's glittering skyline. Instead, the convoy drove deep into the secluded, heavily forested hills overlooking the bay. We finally pulled into a sprawling, brutalist stone compound that looked less like a Mafia estate and more like a modern military fortress. Armed guardsmen who looked far more disciplined than my father's street-level thugs patrolled the high walls. Sebastian didn't wait for a valet. He opened his own door and walked around to my side, offering his hand. I hesitated, my fingers trembling as I placed them in his palm. The contrast was stark, my pale, shaking hand against his scarred, steady grip. "Welcome to the sanctuary, Harper," he said, leading me up the massive slate steps. Inside the estate was breathtaking. Instead of the gaudy, gold-leafed ostentation of the Sullivan mansion, this place was sleek, functional, and surprisingly warm, filled with dark woods, leather, and walls of books. Ethan Sebastian called out as we entered the foyer. A tall man with sharp cheekbones and wire-rimmed glasses descended the stairs. This was Ethan Mercer Sebastian's rumored underboss and chief strategist. Ethan paused, his eyes sweeping over my ruined wedding dress, the dirt smudged on my cheek, and my chaotic hair. There was no pity in his gaze, only a sharp, calculating intelligence. "The perimeter is secured, boss. Croft's men are running blind in the city. Sullivan is demanding a parley, but we've blocked his comms." Ethan gave me a brief, respectful nod. "Mom, it's an honor." The respect threw me. In my father's house, the lieutenants called me the kid, or simply ignored me. "Have Dr. Brooks meet us in the East Wing." Sebastian ordered his hand, resting lightly but firmly on the small of my back, guiding me forward. "And Ethan Byrne, the Sullivan Alliance ledgers. We're doing this my way now." Sebastian led me into a massive master suite. A fire was already crackling in the stone hearth. He gestured to an adjoining bathroom. "Go wash the dust off. There are clothes in the closet. I had them brought in for you yesterday." I froze. "Yesterday? You planned this before the church." Sebastian paused at the door, his broad shoulders filling the frame. "I've been planning to take you from William Sullivan for 6 months, Harper. The church was just the most public place to break Nathaniel's pride, while I did it." Before I could ask him to explain, he closed the door, leaving me alone. In the bathroom, I finally peeled off the suffocating armor of my wedding dress. I had to use a pair of shears I found in a vanity drawer to cut the brutal corset laces. When the heavy satin fell to the floor, I gasped, taking my first full breath in 12 hours. I looked in the mirror. My soft, full stomach was covered in angry red welts from the boning of the dress. When I opened the closet, expecting to find the usual passive-aggressive, 2 sizes too small garments my mother used to buy me, I stopped dead. The racks were filled with beautiful high-quality fabrics, cashmere sweaters, silk robes, tailored trousers. I pulled out a set of soft, dark green loungewear and slipped it on. It fit perfectly. It didn't pinch, it didn't squeeze, and it didn't try to hide my curves. It embraced them. When I emerged, Dr. Harrison Brooks, a quiet older man with a gentle demeanor, checked my vitals and treated the cuts on my knees from falling in the cathedral. Once he left, Sebastian returned, carrying a tray of food. It wasn't a salad, it wasn't steamed fish. It was a massive bowl of rich, steaming carbonara, a loaf of warm artisan bread, and a glass of deep red wine. He set it on the table near the fire. "Eat," he commanded, gently sitting opposite me. "My father doesn't let me eat carbs," I whispered, an old, ingrained reflex of shame rising in my throat. "He says it's bad for the family image." Sebastian's eyes darkened, a storm brewing in the grey depths. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Your father is a dead man, walking Harper. In this house, you eat what you want. You take up as much space as you desire. Do you understand me? You are not a flaw to be hidden. You are a masterpiece." He was too blind to see. A tear slipped down my cheek, hot and fast. I picked up the fork and took a bite. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. While I ate, Sebastian pulled a thick leather-bound folder from the coffee table. "You asked why you're here. Why I started a war for you." He pushed the file toward me. "Look." I wiped my mouth and opened the folder. Inside were shipping manifests, photographs, and bank transfers. My blood ran cold. Pier 49. Shipments, not weapons, not narcotics. People. Buyer Nathaniel Crofts, Shell Corporations. Facilitator William Sullivan. Your father's empire was bankrupt, Sebastian said, his voice laced with disgust. To save himself, he sold his docks to Croft for human trafficking routes. I don't deal in human lives, Harper. I decided to burn Croft's operation to the ground. But why me? I asked, my voice shaking. I didn't know about this. I swear I didn't. I know you didn't, Sebastian said softly. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished silver locket. 3 years ago, my younger sister Camilla was at a charity gala at the St. Regis. A bomb was planted in the basement by a rival gang. Someone found the bomb, pulled the fire alarm, and stayed behind to try and disarm the timer until the bomb squad arrived. That anonymous tip saved my sister's life. He placed the locket on the table. It was the one I had lost that night in the chaos. You risked your life for a Costa, Sebastian said, looking at me with a reverence that made my breath hitch. I've been watching you ever since. I saw how they treated you. I saw them trying to sell you to a monster. I made a vow, Harper. I was waiting for the right moment to dismantle their empire, but when I heard the wedding was moved up, I moved my timetable. I didn't steal you to use you against your father. I destroyed your father so I could steal you. Sebastian Costa. For 3 weeks, the compound became my world. The war outside raged fiercely. Ethan provided daily briefings, treating me not as a hostage, but as an equal. I began to realize that my years of being the invisible fat girl in my father's house had given me an incredible advantage. People talked when they thought no one of consequence was listening. I knew my father's schedules. I knew the passcodes to his hidden offshore accounts. I knew which lieutenants were loyal and which could be bought. One evening I sat in the war room with Sebastian and Ethan. I pulled a map of the city's docks toward me. Nathaniel is desperate, I said, pointing to a secluded inlet on the map. If he's lost the southern routes, he's going to use the old Smuggler's Cove at Blackwater Point. My father abandoned it years ago, but the infrastructure is still there. If they are moving a shipment tonight, that's where they'll be. Sebastian looked at me, a proud, dangerous smile playing on his lips. You're sure? I'm a Sullivan, I said, my voice steady. I know how the rats in my family think. The raid was swift and merciless. Sebastian's men hit Blackwater Point at midnight. Sitting in the armored mobile command center, alongside Ethan, I watched the thermal drone footage as the Costa Syndicate dismantled Nathaniel's human trafficking ring in less than 20 minutes. But a cornered rat is the most dangerous kind. My phone, which had been silent for weeks, buzzed. It was an unknown number, but the text chilled me to the bone. Unknown sender. You think you're safe playing queen with the enemy, Harper. Your father gave me the backdoor codes to Costa's security grid. Check the perimeter. I'm coming for my bride. Ethan, I shouted, dropping the phone. Nathaniel isn't at the docks. He hacked the compound. Before Ethan could radio the guards left at the estate, a massive explosion shook the command center's monitors. Nathaniel had bypassed the outer gates of our sanctuary. Get Sebastian on the comms, Ethan barked, throwing the vehicle into drive. By the time we raced back to the estate, the front courtyard was a war zone. Black SUVs were burning, casting terrifying, flickering shadows against the stone walls. Sebastian arrived mere minutes behind us, leaping from his vehicle with a rifle in hand, his face a mask of absolute lethal fury. I refused to stay in the armored car. I had spent my whole life hiding. I wasn't going to hide while the man who showed me my worth fought my battles. I grabbed a small handgun from Ethan's dashboard Sebastian had taught me how to shoot in the estate's underground range, and slipped out the side door, using the burning vehicles for cover. In the center of the courtyard, surrounded by the bodies of his fallen men, stood Nathaniel. He had a gun pointed directly at Sebastian, who was walking toward him, completely unfazed by the weapon. "You took my docks. You took my bride." Nathaniel screamed, his bespoke suit covered in ash and blood. "You never deserved either," Sebastian snarled, raising his own weapon. "Drop it, Costa," a voice boomed from the shadows. My father, William Sullivan, stepped out from behind a stone pillar, aiming a shotgun at Sebastian's back. "You ruined my family, Sebastian. Now you die." "No," I screamed. I stepped out from behind the SUV, raising my handgun and pointing it squarely at my father's chest. My hands weren't shaking anymore. "Harper." My father blinked, genuinely shocked to see me holding a weapon. "Put the gun down, you stupid fat cow. You're embarrassing yourself. Come here." The old insult, the one that used to make me shrink into myself and cry in my room, washed over me. But it didn't cut anymore. It just sounded pathetic. "I'm not going anywhere with you." I said, my voice ringing out, clear and cold over the crackle of the fires. "You sold people, Dad. You sold me. I'm the one who gave Sebastian the codes to the docks." My father's face contorted in absolute rage. "You ungrateful bitch!" He swung the shotgun toward me. Bang! Bang! 2 shots echoed through the courtyard. I hadn't pulled the trigger. My father dropped to his knees, a blossoming red stain on his chest, before collapsing face forward onto the gravel. I looked over. Sebastian stood with his gun, smoking, his eyes wild with terror, as he looked at me, making sure I was unharmed. Taking advantage of the distraction, Nathaniel aimed at Sebastian's head. "Sebastian," I screamed, finally pulling my own trigger. The recoil bruised my palm, but my bullet caught Nathaniel in the shoulder, spinning him around. Before Nathaniel could recover, Sebastian closed the distance, grabbed him by the throat, and fired point blank into his chest. Silence fell over the courtyard, heavy and suffocating. The war was over. I stood there, the gun hanging limply at my side, staring at the bodies of the 2 men who had controlled my life. A massive, warm weight settled over my shoulders as Sebastian pulled me into his chest, burying his face in my hair. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice thick with an emotion I had never heard from the ruthless Mafia boss. "Harper, look at me. Are you hurt?" I looked up into his storm-grey eyes. "I'm okay." He let out a ragged breath and crushed his lips to mine. It wasn't a tentative kiss. It was a desperate, claiming, fiery collision that tasted of smoke and survival. I kissed him back, wrapping my arms around his neck, pressing my soft body against his hard edges. For the first time in my life, I felt completely secure. 6 months later, I didn't wear white. I wore a stunning, custom-made crimson gown that hugged every curve of my body perfectly. The dress was designed by a woman who understood that power came in all shapes and sizes. We stood on the balcony of the restored compound, looking out over the city. The Sullivan Syndicate was gone, absorbed and purged of its darkest elements. The Croft family was a footnote in the underworld history books. There was only the Costa family now. "They're waiting for us downstairs," Sebastian murmured, wrapping his arms around my waist from behind and kissing the sensitive skin beneath my ear. "The Capos want to formally toast the new queen." I leaned back against his solid chest, looking at our reflection in the glass doors. I saw a powerful, beautiful, fat woman who had survived a gilded cage and conquered a lion's den. "Let them wait." I smiled, turning in his arms. "The queen isn't done with her king just yet. Did Harper's transformation from a terrified pawn to a powerful syndicate queen keep you on the edge of your seat? The underworld is full of dangerous twists, but true power comes from owning exactly who you are. If you loved this dramatic Mafia romance and want to see more thrilling stories of betrayal, loyalty, and fierce revenge. Hit that like button, share with your fellow romance readers, and subscribe to our channel for your next story obsession.